Welcome to Zoom In, Zoom Out, your global look at news from Taiwan. I'm Rick Lowett. Although they are thousands of kilometres apart, Taiwan and Scotland both have heritage languages that are under threat. Taiwanese Tâi-gí or Hokkien was for decades suppressed by the authoritarian nationalist government here in Taiwan, and Scottish Gaelic was similarly once outlawed and banned from schools. Now, for the first time, writers from the two countries are cooperating to revive and protect these mother tongues. A new book called Tâigael features work from writers in both these countries, writing in the once threatened languages of their homes. This is the first book ever published to include short stories in these two languages, and it's the brainchild of British writers Will Buckingham and Hannah Stevens of Wind&Bones Books. Now, Hannah and Will join me today from Tainan. Hannah, Will, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
So first we're going to zoom in and talk about your book, Tâigael. Can you tell us what format the book takes?
Okay, so the book is called Tâigael, Stories from Taiwanese and Gaelic. And we've been working with 4 writers, 2 from Scotland who are writing in Gaelic, and 2 from Taiwan who are writing in Taiwanese or Tâi-gí.
And we're not just commissioning new stories in those languages, but we're also translating between them. So each of the stories will be translated, so from Gaelic to English, to Mandarin to Tâi-gí, and from Tâi-gí to Mandarin to English to Gaelic. So each story by all 4 writers will be in 4 different languages.
So there was a lot of editing, translating, working with different writers in 2 different continents. Can you tell us a little bit about the experience of putting this book together?
Yeah, so it's been fun and it's been interesting. It's been really lovely actually, kind of bringing together writers in the different countries. Also, while we've been based in Tainan, so we had a writers' circle which was online that brought us all together in the first instance. So writers could get to know each other, could start to share ideas, talk about their respective countries, and just kind of get comfortable with the idea and the project.
So the project started back in sometime last year, early last year. We were up at National Taiwan Normal University at a conference on national languages. And as new immigrants to both Scotland and Taiwan, we were interested by language diversity. So we were at this conference and there were people talking about the marginalised languages of the UK, the marginalised languages of Taiwan, and we thought, wouldn't it be fun to do a project that brought these 2 parallel experiences together? So we started thinking about that. We applied for a grant from the Scottish Government. We were successful in that. Then went and tracked down some absolutely fabulous writers from both Scotland and Taiwan to work with.
So we're originally from England, but we were immigrants to Scotland and now we're immigrants to Taiwan. It started to become clear the kind of similarities in terms of the language oppression and then the language revival work that's actually going on in both places. And suddenly it was sort of a bit of a light bulb moment really when we realised, and we thought this will just be a really interesting project and something that's really important and worthwhile as well.
And what did you find whilst you were working together with these different writers and working in often marginalised languages?
I think all languages have almost infinite possibilities for expression. And that goes for English, for Mandarin, for Tâi-gí, for Gaelic, and for all other languages as well. When we asked the writers to write these new stories, we got together and we talked about these common experiences, but we gave them quite a lot of freedom to write the kind of stories they wanted to write. What was interesting in the translation process was how many echoes there were between the various stories. For example, off the top of my head, one thing that cropped up several times was grandmothers. And here in Tainan, if people are learning Tâi-gí, why are you learning Tâi-gí? Well, to speak to your agong ama, to speak to your grandparents because of that generational split. And also one of our Gaelic stories has this focus on that kind of generational transmission as well. So there are quite a lot of lovely echoes between the stories, which came out through the translation process, which is quite collaborative.
Mm. I think for me as well, it was really interesting actually. So as a translator, I think people have to be very meticulous, have to be very precise, very careful. But also what really struck me was that people have to be really creative and imaginative as well, especially if there's not a direct phrase or a direct word. And so that kind of imagination and creativity really struck me and was just really lovely as well.
And we had a lot of fun with that process of the translation. So, for example, in one of the stories, there's a banyan tree outside the temple, but in the Taiwanese it just says a tree outside the temple, and every Taiwanese writer will know that's a banyan tree. But we got it into English, and then we were thinking, what's an English-speaking reader going to imagine? Will they imagine an oak tree? If it's an oak tree, that doesn't work. So some of the stories we've added in context to sort of carry over something of the cultural flavour as well. And so that process has been really fascinating.
Okay, let's zoom out here now and talk a little bit more about you and your lives here in Tainan. And starting with the book, what did it teach you about languages, learning languages, translating languages?
So here in Taiwan, often we associate Taiwanese language with being very, very Taiwanese. But what happens when you're talking about something very Scottish, like a patch of damp brambles with a sheep stuck in it, and you're talking about that in Taiwanese? Or what happens when Mazu, everybody's favourite goddess, starts speaking Gaelic, as she has had to do probably for the first time ever in this project? I think it does, for small languages in particular, one thing that projects like this do that we were excited by is it expands very slightly the sort of outer horizons of the possibilities of what you can do in that language. And all translation does that. I think we've come to recognise that more through this project. And so we'd love to, we're already thinking about other projects we might do. Scotland has other languages, Taiwan has many other languages, and other places where we have connections and where we've worked, we'd be interested to explore similar kinds of translation projects.
So you've been based in Tainan for a couple of years now and you plan to stay. How has your life here in Taiwan's southern old city informed this project?
So here in Tainan, so our neighbours all mainly speak Taiwanese, Tâi-gí. When you've got the window open and you're listening to what's happening outside, it's very much all happening in Taiwanese. So when we go to put the rubbish out, when we wander down the street, that's pretty much kind of all that we hear there. We really started to get interested in Taiwanese, I think, because there was a grandmother that lived across the road from us, and she was very, very curious when we moved in. We're some of the only foreigners in our street. She wanted to talk to us, but we didn't speak Taiwanese, we didn't speak Japanese, and she didn't speak English or much Mandarin. So that really kind of got us thinking, and we thought, this is a language that we really need to explore more and to know more about. So that also kind of formed part of the seed idea for the project.
I think also being in Tainan, so we first came to Taiwan 6 years ago and thought it would be, this is a place we'd love to live. And I'm a long-term learner of Mandarin, but it was astonishing coming to Tainan where you're in a taxi and the first half of the sentence the taxi driver says is in Mandarin, the second half is in Taiwanese. And there was so much I heard around me that I didn't have access to. And I was really intrigued. And I think it would be really fun to get to grips with a whole other language, Taiwanese, but also with this being in a culture where people are moving between languages almost without thinking from one sentence to the next. And that was definitely something that was kind of exciting about the thought of being down south in Taiwan.
I think the long history of kind of multiple languages here as well is just really interesting, and has kind of made us think in interesting ways and about, you know, projects and kind of living. And when we first visited Tainan and we went to the National Museum of Taiwan Literature, the history of the sort of language diversity and diversity of writers, again, was just something that felt really inspiring.
You've both done a lot of work with marginalised communities or working together with communities, written books and projects that look at people on the edge or underrepresented voices. Could you tell us how this book aligns with some of your values or some of your missions in your work?
So in terms of our work at Wind&Bones, so as well as publishing, we also run projects on writing, creativity, social change and philosophy. And we often find ourselves so at the margins of academia, but mainly our real love is working in community settings, and we really love working with voices that might be quieter, that might not be given as much kind of room. So yeah, seeing that in the Literature Museum, and kind of how literature is a tool for democracy and positive social change, really dovetailed in, I think, with our work at Wind&Bones and our personal beliefs as well.
I think it's incredibly important that language diversity becomes something that is considered not a problem, but actually a resource for maybe thinking and feeling more broadly, something that is a positive contribution to a community. I think that's the case in the UK, where there's a astonishing diversity of languages spoken. There are UK heritage languages, but there are also many other languages. So west of where we used to live, I think the street close to where we both lived was the most linguistically diverse in Europe, another road.
Yes.
So I think that kind of language diversity, we sometimes see it as a problem. And in this book, what we really wanted to do was to see it more as a source of richness. That's why we presented these stories in 4 languages. The Taiwanese stories are in 2 versions, because there's Romanized a version, and there's also a version written with hand characters. But also we are now producing recordings. We received another small grant to do recordings, so that maybe people who don't speak some of these languages or speak them well can connect in with that sense of music, with that sense of that this is a whole world that, you know, if they had time enough, they could engage with and enter into. It is very strongly connected with I suppose, a broader vision of what makes a society strong, rich, worth living in, and I think that is ultimately pluralism, diversity, and the ability to move between those different contexts.
What we've also found as well, I think both in terms of our experience in Scotland and in Taiwan, is that people really want to share these languages. So people aren't gatekeeping them, people aren't trying to keep us out and from learning these languages. And actually, you know, you just need to say a few words in Gaelic when we're in Scotland, or, you know, Taiwanese here, and people are just delighted and are really, really excited that we're engaging and wanting to take part in using these languages and communicating in them as well.
Hannah, Will, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's been fun.
It's been a pleasure.
This has been Zoom In, Zoom Out. For more stories from Taiwan and around the world, you can follow Taiwan Plus on social media or check out our website. I'm Rick Lowett, and we will see you next time.